Preschool teachers, have you ever had little learners in your classroom who had big feelings and emotions? And if so, did you struggle to help them handle those feelings and emotions? You're in luck because that's exactly what today's episode of Elevating Early Childhood is all about. We'll be diving into the world of preschool emotions, exploring how to teach children critical emotional skills that will help them manage their big feelings and ultimately improve behavior. I'm your host, Vanessa, a veteran pre-K teacher with more than 20 years of classroom experience. And I like to help teachers just like you teach better, save time, and live more inside my mentorship program, Teaching Trailblazers. We're going to flip the script a little bit today because one of our very own Teaching Trailblazers, Meg, is joining us as a guest host for the next few episodes of Elevating Early Childhood. She's also a veteran educator with over 20 years of experience in both independent and public schools. Meg has trained future teachers at the university level and served as an instructional coach for pre-K teachers, leading professional development and modeling lessons. She currently teaches junior kindergarten in Chicago. Welcome, Meg.
Thank you so much for having me, Vanessa.
I am just thrilled that you reached out because I am always in need of inspiration to do more podcast episodes.
Yes, I reached out to Vanessa just for the listeners because I thought she does such excellent interviews, but I always want to know more from Vanessa and what she has to say about things. When I found out she was doing some social emotional lessons and units, I couldn't resist saying, could we delve more into that? We've heard a lot about post-pandemic behavior in preschools. We want to make sure we're not just griping, and we want to make sure that is factual and grounded in research and not just something that is a trend. Everything you do, Vanessa, is so practical and research based. So we want to make sure that we're not diving into an issue that's just something we're hearing on social media.
Exactly. And that's always been my goal because I spent 20 years sitting through PowerPoint presentation after PowerPoint presentation that had absolutely nothing to do with pre-K. So I am thrilled to be able to bring training specifically to the world, specifically for pre-K teachers. So yeah, that's my passion.
Absolutely. And the social emotional learning is just so important right now. So we look at a couple of studies that really show this, and then we'll get right to the good practical information that you bring. But a University of Calgary study found that 1 in 3 babies born during the pandemic. So if you're like me, I teach 4-year-olds. So if you teach 4-year-olds, this is the cohort we just had born in 2020 and the cohort we're about to receive in the fall born in 2021. They showed, so 1 in 3 babies showed a delay of social or communication development, which is double the usual rate. So again, that's one grounding study that shows us that yes, this is not something teachers are complaining about behavior, that there actually is. Kids are really struggling. They're not trying to give us a hard time. They're actually having a hard time. And then in 2024, there was another study from Scientific Reports that found that preschoolers tested after the pandemic were 30% less likely to grasp others' thoughts and feelings, which we know is so important. Their play and building empathy and all of the things that we do in preschool. If they cannot read someone's emotion, there's going to be more conflict. Yes. So let's get into it then. What to do about this? What are some typical signs that teachers can look at right from the beginning of the year that we can watch for on those first days of school that indicate a child might need extra emotional support?
I think that it's super easy to do in the beginning of the year. It's going to be the prime time for you to put on your social emotional goggles because everything in the beginning of the year is an opportunity to observe how they're doing in their social emotional development. So the first thing I thought of was separation anxiety. If we see kids having a really hard time separating from their primary caregivers, we can automatically see that they're having trouble regulating their big emotions. So that's a big sign right there. Those children are going to need our attention probably first. Another place that we can really see some gaps in social emotional learning are during those times of the days, like transitions, right? And cleanup is basically a transition, right? So you'll see a transition where you're going from one activity to another. If the child has a hard time doing that or has outbursts during that time, that's the perfect time for you to say, aha, and make note. And the same for cleanup. If the child is flat out refusing or looks at you like, I don't care who you are, lady, but I'm not doing that. Or they show through their behavior that this is not something that they are willing to do. That's another red flag. And then, of course, behaviors during their interactions with their peers, which would happen every day throughout the day, obviously, because play is
Right.
how they learn best. But it's center time. Things like snatching toys, hitting, biting. What's the child's
Right.
reaction to
Right.
their interactions with others if something like that happens? And so those are another big red flag. So
The intrusions are normal themselves,
yeah,
but what you're saying when a child has a bigger reaction than that we would expect. Some of the behavior we have to remember is developmentally appropriate, but then if there's a larger reaction, maybe that's the child who needs extra support.
absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Perfect.
So, what are your go-to methods? What are some things that teachers can just start with first with helping preschoolers identify and express their feelings in a healthy way?
One of the things that you helped me remember, Meg, because sometimes I forget the resources that I have, is the feelings check in. And you have so graciously created this chart for us. Look at that. So, this is available to all of our trailblazers to download inside of membership. And of course, it's open to the public as well from the store. But tell me about a little bit about that, Meg.
Yeah. So as a trailblazer, I have the access to all. This is how I found Vanessa's when I transitioned from elementary to early childhood. Vanessa helped me learn how to do fine motor and all of the things on the PreK Pages website. But quickly, I found Trailblazers, and that's been giving me some of these resources that I just printed this out yesterday and scotch taped it onto. And I did get this from Amazon, but we can probably link it in the show notes. But it didn't take a ton of time or prep, and what I love, it has the real photographs because we know a lot of times with masks during the pandemic, I would use this, but kids need to be able to see faces to
Right.
learn emotions and pair the vocabulary with the
Yeah, I like how you're using the clothespins to clip it. So you're getting some fine motor in there too. And
right.
that's a bonus, right?
Absolutely, right.
And they're
Sneak
clipping
it
the
in.
clothespin to the picture of how they are feeling currently. And so there's a daily opportunity for you to touch base with them to see how they're feeling that day. And it might also tip you off to some potential behaviors you might see that day.
Right, and making it okay to talk about those negative feelings. Not in every home is that welcome, so we have to make it really welcome in our class.
And another one that you reminded me of, Meg, was the options bingo with pictures of children making these faces, which is also the same faces that you showed on the feelings check in. But that is a quick and easy way to get kids to start, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. That's one I use in my classroom, and the kids love it. And they really, they always struggle with it at first every year because I think a lot of times it's not discussed and that it's okay. Sad and mad or bad is something we talk about right from the beginning. That we all feel these feelings and just normalizing it. And we also look at mirrors when we're playing the bingo too, so we can kind of see our own faces and starting to just build the vocabulary for kids.
Yeah, I think that's what struck me was when you mentioned the vocabulary, because this gives us a very soft launch into
Right.
introducing the vocabulary to them in a very meaningful way and a playful thing, right? Because we're also teaching them how to play bingo in most cases. Most
Right.
preschoolers haven't ever played that before. So you're introducing to them to that fun game and activity. You're making it playful. And you're also
Yes.
introducing them to some academic vocabulary.
We
It's
always play with a small group table first, right? So they can see how important it is to me as their teacher that I'm going to teach this as a lesson, that your feelings are just as important to me as everything else, if not more important, because we have to start there.
right, exactly. So yeah, I think those are two of my very quick beginning of the year go to resources. The emotions bingo and the feelings check in would be really simple ways to start implementing some things into your classroom to get that full conversation going with the kids and start to integrate that vocabulary into their everyday vernacular, right? We want them to be
Right.
not only identifying the emotions that they see, but also using those words to describe the
Absolutely.
emotions of themselves and others. And I think that these are two great launching points that we can use to do that.
Yes, I agree. So I already used the bingo. I'm excited to use the feelings check in this year as I roll out these units. I was wondering, what if the feeling is mad? Can you give us an example of an activity that you found especially effective in that situation?
If the feelings are mad, I just let them know that it's okay to be mad. Everyone is
Mhm.
mad sometimes. And I would even say to them, I got mad the other day when I was coming to school and some driver pulled in front of me and it scared me and I got really mad. And let them know that adults have these mad feelings too. So first you're going to give them permission to feel the feeling,
Yes.
right? And then ask them, how did it make you feel? So at the beginning
Right.
of the year, You might say something like, you know what I did when I felt like that, when that car cut in front of me and I got so upset? You know what I did? I took a couple of deep breaths. Can you do it with me? It might be simple. I'm not
Yeah.
even using some specific
Right.
strategy there. It's just to breathe in
Right.
and breathe
Just
out.
breathing.
I would say some kids have done this before and it's helped them. Let's try it and see if it helps you,
Right.
just something very simple like that. And you're not taking a whole long lesson. This child is just saying, I'm mad. And then you can explore that with them in a very constructive and supportive way that's also brief.
If they're verbalizing it, maybe it doesn't come out in behavior as much if you're able to get them to tell you more about that and you don't shut them down. Sometimes adults don't allow that in their classrooms or houses. They don't allow those more negative emotions. Kids are kind of in trouble if they're mad, right? So just even letting them verbalize it and giving them space and teaching them to breathe, it sounds like.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And we'll get it more into the calm down corner and other things in future episodes here, but that's just kind of a launching off point here. And then how can teachers incorporate emotional learning into everyday classroom routines without it being overwhelming?
I think some of the best ways to do that are through things that you're already doing, right? So, what do we do every day in our classroom? What's the one like non negotiable? If there was one, it would be reading a story, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the more stories you read during the day, the better. That's just proven. Literacy
Right.
fact, I call it.
Right.
What about a social story during a read aloud?
Yes.
So, what came to mind for me there, Meg, was that first of all, teachers always want lists of books because we don't have a lot of
Yeah.
time, right? To go to the library on the
Right.
weekend and peruse the shelves to find that just right book. I mean, we've got to catch up on our lives on the weekends. Book lists. We have a lot of those book lists over at PreK pages. A couple that came to the top of my mind were we have a new book list about feeling frustrated. Then we have one about feeling sad, and then another about mad. And I know there's another great big book list of all the emotions, all the main major emotions
Right.
in one post. And then, of course, our trailblazers have access to the printable versions of those as well. And then the other thing I thought of was the new Seeds of Success curriculum that we've
Yeah.
launched inside of Trailblazers. And that's SOS for short. and
Because literally we is the help that's coming after the pandemic is the SOS.
or save our students, as I like to
Save
call
our
it. Social stories, and these are not anything new to the world. Social
Right.
stories have been around for a long time. But I think that most of the ones we find out there are written for much older children. And
They're
so
very
we're kind of
wordy.
trying to pound that square peg into the round hole. And so what I
Yes.
did was I made them all preschool friendly. So
Right.
I put my preschool teacher spin on all of them. So the text is somewhat predictable. It is
Right.
short. And it also follows this criteria of acknowledge the feeling, give some solutions to the feeling, give some strategies, give some scenarios, and then the closing in each of the books is now I know how to. And then we state it again. So we're using vocabulary in each book. I think the images are age appropriate and align with a lot of the other imagery that we use in most of our curriculums. So I really think these are going to go a long
It
way.
struck me that they're very clear
Mhm.
and kid friendly, but also, a lot of times when I get these books that people say this is good for social emotional, it's like a metaphor. And it's like, this would be great for fourth grade, but this
Right.
doesn't work for early childhood. So I love how clear the books are. And it's just real simple. I don't have to think a lot as a teacher. I could just read that book and they've got it. They
Right.
understand to
Right.
revisit it, right? When
Right.
those feelings come up. I always say when we're trying to teach social emotional in a vacuum, it's like learning how to drive without a car. We have to do it in the moment
Right.
when the feeling strikes. So maybe we get that book back out, right? When the feeling strikes, right?
Yeah. And the one thing I tried to do was to make a version that you can read aloud to your whole class. So that's full page.
Right.
And you can do that in a lot of different ways, whether you want to project them or you want to hold them in your hand. I'm a hold them in your hand kind of a person. Or they come in the half page size in black and white. And then you can send them home with the kids to get parent engagement and involvement because you want what you're teaching in your classroom to carry over into the home.
Yes. And our parents really want to help a lot of times, but they don't quite
Right.
know how. They need to know what we're learning in the classroom and how they can help at home. And
Right.
so that's just that parent education is really a huge part of early childhood.
Right, exactly. It's like we have so many hats that we wear and
Right.
parent education is just one of them. So there's the one that they take home, and then there's the one that read in the classroom. But I also like to put a version to keep in the classroom library or the calm down corner so that they know if
Right.
they want one of those books, they know exactly where to go to get it.
Okay.
And in each of the lessons, it tells you what day to do that on and how to do it. If you like that kind of structure, what do you say and how do you do it? So it's actually in there for the teachers who need that. And then, of course, we couldn't talk about social emotional without talking about the down corner. But we're going to go into that more in depth in our next episode. So I don't want to go too deep. But I will say that just having a calm down area, corner, whatever you want to call it, is not enough, right?
Agreed. Has to be taught, right?
It's
No.
all about how you introduce it and use it in your classroom so it works with you instead of against you.
Not a meant. It's not a
Right.
timeout. You don't have to go here now, but we'll get more into that later. But it is such a useful tool when used correctly. And we also, teachers often, one of the struggles that they're facing is time. There's all these things they have to teach. And a lot of times teachers like, oh, this is just one more thing. How can they realistically prioritize emotional learning if they have a more academic focused curriculum?
I love that question, first of all, because I recently had a training that I did for our members where we discussed how social emotional learning is what comes before the academics. So, yes,
100%.
we all have like objectives, standards, guidelines, whatever you want to call them, depending on where you live in the world. And we do have to meet those. But the one thing about all these objectives and standards and guidelines and so forth is they don't include the prerequisites, right? What's before that? What comes before a child can learn the alphabet? What comes before they can learn this or that? And the answer to that is the basic foundation upon which we're building all of the academic stuff, right?
Right.
It's the social emotional piece. You can't
Right.
get to the academics unless you have the social emotional learning.
Regulate, right? Because
Right.
you're yeah, absolutely, we have to before we can get to academics. And I think it kinda goes with it, you had an episode recently on play, and it's not us versus them on the play, we don't wanna perpetuate that, but we do want people to understand that play is where conflict happens, which is why sometimes programs don't wanna do it, but we have to have that conflict so that we can help kids be right there to navigate these feelings, right? So that when they do get to academics, if they have a problem with a friend or something, it doesn't take over their whole day, right? That they can regulate and they can solve conflicts before
Absolutely. Yeah.
where you're, step by step.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, we can't get to those academics if we're constantly putting out the behavior fires, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
We're
And
just
having coming from older children, I know how important that is. Like, I would much rather, have gotten a child in my elementary classroom who had the social, emotional, and all the academics we can get to if you're regulated. But if you have to go back and teach that, it's very difficult.
right. Then you're kind of wearing in more hats, right?
Right.
We're working against ourselves if we try to push through, right? Because some teachers will say, I just have to push through because I have to do this. I have to check that box.
Right.
But if you're not supporting the social emotional development in your classroom, then are you really? Because
Right.
your children learn if they're in constant state of dysregulation and there's constant fires to be put out, right?
Right.
So that's my 2 cents on that.
I could go all day on this topic. I feel like, we think about if we really rank the importance of skills that we're teaching, I mean, this is something that can help kids through their whole life. If they can learn regulation at this age, it opens so many doors for them that we're really all the other skills can wait. What's the best advice you've received or discovered for helping children who seem resistant or unable to calm down during intense emotional moments?
I think that the first thing we have to remember is that you can't teach social emotional regulation in the moment, right? If a child is already dysregulated to the point where they're having intense emotions, intense big feelings, right? And
Right.
big reactions to things that are happening, that's not the time to teach anything, right?
Right.
Your focus isn't going to be on teaching at that moment. It's going to be on keeping them safe and the other children safe, if indeed it is a situation where that might happen. And instead, focus on helping them breathe and
Mhm.
distracting them, right? Maybe, and
Right.
it depends on what time of the year you're in. You might
Right.
have some strategies you can pull from.
Right.
You might say something like, oh, you know what? Do you remember the whatever it is strategy that you introduced to them in the curriculum at some point? Can we get that out and try it? Right?
Yes. I like how you're changing your tone of voice just very subtly. You're, kind of a soft and going with the child instead of against the situation, right? It's not, you're going to stop this right now. It's,
Right, right.
oh, no, this is heavy. Let's stop for a second, right?
Yeah, because if they're going up here, way up high with their emotions, if I come in way up high too, now we're just fighting against each other. Like our
Right,
this and our tone and our feelings are just
right,
fighting against each other, working against each other. So I have to come in low, right?
right,
I have to come in this very calm manner because they need to see that although they're having these big emotions, that I don't have to be that way too.
right,
I can actually, oh, she's speaking calmly. It's like an invitation, right?
right,
But that doesn't mean it's going to work like a magic pill or something, right?
right. That's
But it's also something they can expect from me. Like that's how
right.
my interactions with them are going to go. If they continue with these behaviors, I'll still come in low every time. So I think that
And
thinking about
it
how,
builds trust. If they're elevated
yeah,
and you're steady, it builds that trust, right?
exactly, that I'm not going to lash out at them. I'm not going to, and then punishing them. They need to know that I'm not going to punish them for a skill that I have not yet taught them.
Yes.
Right.
It
And
is
then,
this missing skill, right? Like it's a missing skill. And we've all been there in the moment where it's so frustrating, overwhelming. We feel inadequate as a teacher in that moment. Like, I
right.
don't quite know what to do. And it's why I love that you start with breathing, because the breathing can just be for the teacher too, right? If the child won't breathe, at least you're reminding yourself that's, you got to regulate yourself first, right? In
Right.
that moment. Uh,
Exactly. Some of that comes from my favorite behavior specialist, Dan St. Romain. I got that
yes.
from him, right? We're not going to punish a child for a skill he does not yet have that I
Yes.
haven't taught him. So I think that that's really important for both teachers and parents to know because so often our go to is going to
Right.
be to crack down on that right now
Right.
because we don't want it to escalate. But in fact, if we crack down on it, it's going
Right.
to escalate even further.
And we can get fearful in those moments, but if we can keep ourselves calm,
Mm,
it helps, helps us think in those frontal lobes and not get triggered as well. We gotta stay calm. That's our job in that moment. Is if nothing else, just
right.
maintain your composure. And I love the volume that you go lower just
Mhm.
naturally. Can you share a story from your years of teaching just about a child who struggled emotionally but improved significantly through
Mhm.
this kind of targeted emotional skill building?
I think that it's important to note that I didn't have the Seeds of Success curriculum when I was in the
Right.
classroom. It was my experience that helped build it. But I
Right.
think that a lot of the things I was already doing were definitely in alignment with this.
Okay.
And so, one child that comes to mind, we'll call him David. We don't
Mhm.
use real names, we're
Right.
professional educators. And he was the oldest child of a single mom. And he had a couple of younger siblings, right? So he came
Okay.
to the classroom, he was 4, but he was an older 4. He turned 5 like right away. And he really pushed back on anything and everything that I did as far as like our daily schedule went or cleaning up or anything that he could resist, he would. And so
Right.
constantly at odds. And he was, showing these big emotions. And I was like, gosh, what is going on here? And so I just kept trying to get to know him, trying to get to know him, trying to get to know him. And finally it came out that he was mainly in charge of his younger siblings all the time, right? So
Wow.
he's an oldest child who is used to being in control of the situation
Mhm. At
at
age 4.
age 4. Yes. And so, like, I realized the way I realized this was that he was always being very empathetic towards
Oh,
his peers, I was like, that is so interesting because he's also so very oppositional. But he would be the first to bring them a tissue. If they hurt themselves, he would be the first to come over and say, oh, what's wrong? And I was like, I wonder if this might be my key, my ticket, my golden ticket that I need.
yes.
I talked with him about what it was like at home and tell me your siblings' names, tell me how old they are. He knew everything about his siblings because
Right.
he was in charge. So I said, what if I gave him more responsibility and more control in the classroom? And yes, I treated him differently, but that's because it's what he needed, right?
Right.
In order to,
A job, right? The sense of belonging in a job. Yeah.
and so that's what he got was he got a job.
Right.
And his job was a little different than others. So he helped me set up and tear down at the end of the day. So he would help me set up some centers, like if I had small group activities going on or something. He knew my system. Like
Yeah.
many of the system that only adults can follow, or so I
Right.
thought. He was also physically large, so he got to stack the chairs.
which we now know OTs use that, right? As occupational therapists use the heavy work,
Right.
but also really purposefully here, right? Not just carrying something heavy, but actually doing something that really he knows helps you. He's used to being a caregiver, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
capitalizing on his strength. How important, and we touched a little bit on this, but I think it's so important. How important is a teacher's own emotional well being when trying to support preschoolers with emotional development?
I think it's more important than anything else because
Okay.
it's so easy for us to get dysregulated as adults when
Right.
it comes to working with young children because we're dealing with so many
Right.
dysregulated children, right? If you're in a public school classroom like I was, you've got a lot of little bodies. And so you have a lot of dysregulated little bodies. And so it can really take its toll on you if all of a sudden everyone is having a flare up today of their big emotions. So it's really important to be regulated yourself and to realize when you're getting dysregulated because, it it so easily gets out of control, just like with the kids, right? And you might find your voice raising, or you might find yourself just feeling really frustrated because this is the third time today and I haven't gotten anything done on my list, you know? But if you're not regulated, how can they be regulated? So, one of the things that I really like is yoga in the classroom. In the Seeds of Success, we actually have yoga poses throughout the entire curriculum. So, my advice is to do the poses with the children. Now, you have had experience with this, Meg, right?
I had that several years ago. I had a student who was pretty dysregulated, and I would put on yoga for the rest of the class. I would just sometimes, because just to calm myself down first, I would do it too. And it made a world of difference. And the children bought in more when I would do it, but it would also, we have to regulate our own nervous system first before we can
Right.
regulate the children, right?
Right.
So it really does help. It feels counterintuitive. Like my job here is to stop this, but I
Right.
think calming yourself is sometimes the best thing you can do for children.
Yes. And I think also it not only helps us as the adult, but it also allows you to model for your students and to be
Right.
present for them in the moment.
Right.
I think that is really an important thing to remember because I think a lot of us get caught up in the whole, I have to do this now. And so I'm going to turn on this yoga video and you do your thing. I'm going to go over here and get centers ready or something. You know what I
Right.
mean?
I put it on so you can do that and I can do something else.
Yeah.
But we show them, yes.
Right. And so then it becomes something that, oh, it's not really important because she's not doing it with me. But if you
Right.
can, not every teacher can do that
Right.
physically, but I think if you can, it's really helpful
Agree.
in both arenas there.
So if you had to give teachers just one takeaway message or a tip about supporting preschoolers emotionally, what would it be?
So I really think that I'm speaking to the people here who might think it's just another thing or too much on their plate.
Right.
But if you don't build the solid foundation for social emotional learning in your classroom, right now, your students will continue to struggle, right?
Right.
So if that's the case, if you think you don't have time to build social emotional learning into your day, then you will have to accept that you're going to have to continue to put out those behavior fires
Right.
that burn in your classroom the rest of the year.
Right.
Personally, I don't know about you all out there listening, but I like to teach smarter and not harder. So that's my
Yes.
closing thought.
All right.
Well,
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
I want to thank you, Meg, for helping us flip the script here and being my guest host. For all of you out there listening or watching along, I want to thank you for joining us here. We're going to continue this conversation more about social emotional learning in the next few episodes. So be sure to stay tuned, and Meg and I will be back next week with another episode. Till next time, I'm Vanessa, and this is Meg. Onward and upward.